In the shadow of Hunterbury's mournful cypress trees, a young woman, Elinor Carlisle, stands accused of a chilling double murder: her aunt and her romantic rival, poisoned by her own hand, or so it seems. Enter Hercule Poirot, whose keen mind unravels a web of love, jealousy, and betrayal. A doctor's twisted devotion, a hidden poison, and a tragic mistake point to a truth far darker than anyone suspects. Will Poirot's little gray cells save an innocent soul, or reveal a killer hiding in plain sight? Chapter 1. The Shadow of Suspicion. The courtroom in Maidensford was a study in contrasts. The dark oak paneling absorbed the light, while the high windows cast stark beams across the faces of the onlookers, who sat in hushed anticipation. The air was thick with the weight of accusation, and at the center of it all stood Elinor Carlisle, her slender figure erect in the dock, her dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the judge's bench. She was a picture of composure, yet the faint tremor in her clasped hands betrayed the storm within. The charge was murder, 2 murders, in fact, that of her aunt, Mrs. Laura Wellman, and of Mary Gerard, the gardener's daughter who had, by all accounts, stolen the heart of Elinor's fiancé. The prosecution's voice rang out, sharp and unrelenting, weaving a tale of jealousy, greed, and cold calculation. Mr. Seddon, the counsel for the Crown, adjusted his spectacles and addressed the jury with measured gravitas. Miss Elinor Carlisle, he declared, had both motive and opportunity. The evidence is irrefutable. Her fingerprints on the teapot containing traces of morphine, her documented purchase of the drug, and her presence at Hunterbury House on the day both victims met. Their tragic ends. He paused, letting the words settle like dust in the still room. This was no accident, ladies and gentlemen. It was a deliberate act, born of a heart consumed by envy and the fear of losing a vast inheritance. The jury, a collection of somber faces, farmers, shopkeepers, and a retired schoolmistress, listened intently. Whispers rippled through the gallery, where villagers craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the accused. Elinor's beauty, her refined features framed by a simple black hat, only heightened the drama. She was the last of the Carlisles' heiress to Hunterbury, a grand estate that had stood for centuries in the rolling hills of Maidensford. Yet here she was, accused of poisoning her aunt, a frail but formidable woman, and Mary Gerard, whose youth and charm had captivated more than one heart in the village. In the back of the courtroom, unobtrusive yet unmistakable, sat Hercule Poirot. His neat mustache and polished shoes marked him as an outsider, a figure of curiosity among the locals. His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, missed nothing. The prosecutor's theatrical flourish, the jury's uneasy glances, and the rigid posture of the young woman in the dock. Poirot had come to Maidensford at the behest of a friend, a solicitor, who doubted the simplicity of the case. "There is something amiss, Poirot," he had said. "The evidence is too perfect, too convenient." And so, Poirot had taken a seat, his little gray cells already stirring. Analyzing the scene before him, the prosecution called its first witness, Mrs. Bishop, the housekeeper at Hunterbury House, a stout woman with a face like weathered stone. She took the stand with reluctance, her hand smoothing her apron as if to steady herself. Under questioning, she recounted the day of the tragedy, a tea party in the garden, arranged by Elinor for Mary Gerard. Mrs. Wellman, though weak from a recent stroke, had insisted on joining them. Sandwiches, prepared by Elinor's own hand, were served. Within hours, both Mrs. Wellman and Mary were dead, their bodies racked by convulsions, their lips tinged blue. Morphine, the coroner had confirmed, was the cause. And did Miss Carlisle show any ill will toward Miss Gerard? Mr. Seddon pressed. Mrs. Bishop hesitated, her loyalty to the Carlisle family warring with her duty to the truth. Miss Elinor was always kind, she said slowly, but there was tension. Yes, Miss Gerard. She turned Mr. Roddy's head, and Miss Elinor felt it keenly. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Roddy Wellman, Elinor's cousin and fiancé, was absent. His name, a ghost that haunted the proceedings. Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Tension, yes. But was it enough to drive a woman like Elinor to murder? Her face, pale but resolute, suggested a strength that did not align with the portrait of a vengeful killer. And why, he wondered, had Mrs. Wellman eaten the sandwiches meant for Mary? The question nagged at him, a loose thread in the tapestry of evidence. As the court adjourned for the day, Poirot lingered, observing the crowd. A young man, broad-shouldered and earnest, approached Elinor's counsel with a look of quiet desperation. Poirot recognized him from the village, Dr. Peter Lord, the local physician who had attended Mrs. Wellman in her final days. His eyes fixed on Elinor as she was led away, held a depth of emotion that intrigued Poirot. Here, perhaps, was a piece of the puzzle, a man whose heart might reveal more than the cold facts of the case. Outside, the summer air was heavy with the scent of roses, a stark contrast to the gloom of the courtroom. Poirot adjusted his hat and began to walk toward Hunterbury House, determined to see the scene of the crime for himself. The shadow of suspicion hung over Elinor Carlisle, but Hercule Poirot trusted his instincts, and they told him that the truth lay hidden, waiting for his meticulous mind to uncover it. Chapter 2. The call to action. The sun hung low over Maidensford, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets as Hercule Poirot stepped out of the courtroom into the languid warmth of the summer evening. The village, with its quaint stone cottages and blooming hedgerows, seemed an unlikely stage for the tragedy that had unfolded. Yet the air carried a subtle undercurrent of unease. The trial of Elinor Carlisle had stirred the community, and whispers followed Poirot as he made his way toward the Red Lion Inn, where he had taken lodgings. His mind, however, was not on the curious glances of passers-by, but on the puzzle that lay before him, puzzle of human passions, motives, and the delicate threads of truth woven into a tapestry of accusation. Poirot's polished shoes clicked rhythmically on the pavement, his small, precise steps betraying none of the turmoil that churned within his little gray cells. The case against Elinor Carlisle was formidable, yet something in its very strength troubled him. Evidence, he knew, could be as deceptive as a conjurer's trick. And the neatness of this case, the fingerprints, the morphine purchase, the clear motive of jealousy felt too polished, too convenient. It was as if someone had arranged the pieces with care, leaving no room for doubt. But doubt, Poirot reflected, was the detective's greatest ally. As he approached the inn, a figure emerged from the gathering dusk, a young man, broad-shouldered and earnest, his face marked by the strain of sleepless nights. Poirot recognized him at once. Dr. Peter Lord, the physician who had caught his attention in the courtroom. The doctor's eyes, a clear hazel, were bright with purpose, though shadowed by worry. He hesitated, then stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice low but steady, "I must speak with you. It's about Elinor, Miss Carlisle. I know you're a man who sees what others miss. Will you hear me out?" Poirot regarded him with a keen gaze, noting the slight tremor in the doctor's hands, the earnestness that bordered on desperation. "Mais oui, Monsieur le Docteur," he replied, his tone courteous but probing. "I am always interested in the truth, and you, I think, have something to tell me. Shall we walk? The air is pleasant, and it is better, perhaps, to speak where walls do not listen." Dr. Lord nodded, and the two men turned toward a quiet lane that wound past the churchyard, where ancient yews stood sentinel. The doctor's steps were heavy, as if the weight of his thoughts pressed upon him. "I've known Elinor since we were children," he began, his voice soft with memory. "She's not what they say, a murderess, consumed by jealousy. She's kind, thoughtful, and, well, she's been through more than anyone should bear. Losing Roddy, her aunt's illness, and now this monstrous accusation. Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly. You speak with great affection, Doctor. You care for Mademoiselle Carlisle, do you not? A flush crept up Dr. Lord's neck, but he met Poirot's gaze squarely. I do, I won't deny it. But that's not why I'm here. I believe in her innocence, Monsieur Poirot, with every fiber of my being. The evidence, it's all wrong. It's too perfect, as if someone wanted her to take the blame. I've heard of your methods, how you unravel what others cannot. Will you help her, please? The plea was raw, unguarded, and Poirot felt a stirring of sympathy. Yet sympathy, he knew, must not cloud judgment. Tell me, Doctor, he said, his voice measured, why do you think the evidence is, as you say, wrong? What do you know of the events at Hunterbury House? Dr. Lord hesitated, choosing his words with care. I was Mrs. Physician, he said. She'd had a stroke some months ago, and I visited her regularly. Elinor was devoted to her aunt, always at her side, managing the household, Mary Gerard. She was different, a sweet girl, but naive, caught up in dreams of a life beyond Maidensford. Roddy Mr. Wellman fell for her, and it broke Elinor's heart, though she never showed it. The day of the tea party, I wasn't there, but I know Elinor would never have harmed Mary or her aunt. It's not in her nature. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, the morphine was found. The sandwiches were prepared by Mademoiselle Carlisle. And both victims died. You are a man of medicine, Doctor. What do you make of the poison? Dr. Lord's brow furrowed. Morphine is a dangerous thing, he said. It's not hard to obtain, especially for someone like Elinor, who was managing her aunt's care. But the amount, it was excessive, far more than a therapeutic dose. And the teapot, why would Elinor leave her fingerprints so carelessly? She's not a fool. Someone else must have had access to the kitchen, to the morphine. Someone else, Poirot echoed, his voice soft but sharp. Who, Doctor? Who else was at Hunterbury that day? The doctor's jaw tightened. Mrs. Bishop, the housekeeper, was there, and Nurse Hopkins, who helped care for Mrs. Wellman. There were gardeners about, but they didn't come inside. And, well, I suppose anyone could have slipped in. The house is large, the doors often unlocked. Poirot nodded, filing away the names. And you, Doctor, where were you when the tragedy occurred? I was at my surgery, seeing patients. Dr. Lord replied quickly. I didn't hear about it until later, when Nurse Hopkins sent for me. By then it was too late, both were gone. His voice broke, and he looked away. Toward the darkening horizon, Poirot observed him closely, noting the sincerity in his words, but also the faint unease that lingered in his posture. The doctor was hiding something, not a lie, perhaps, but a truth he was reluctant to share. Poirot decided not to press, not yet. Instead, he offered a small, encouraging smile. Very well, Doctor. I will take the case. I will go to Hunterbury House tomorrow, and see this place of tragedy for myself. But I warn you, monsieur, the truth is not always kind. It may reveal things you do not wish to see. Dr. Lord's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment, gratitude and fear warred in his expression. I understand, he said quietly. Just save her, Monsieur Poirot. That's all I ask. They parted ways at the churchyard gate, the doctor returning to his modest home and Poirot to the Red Lion Inn. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the velvet sky, and Poirot's mind buzzed with questions. Who had truly wielded the poison? Was it jealousy, as the prosecution claimed, or something deeper, more insidious? And why had Dr. Lord's hands trembled when he spoke of Mary Gerard? The following morning Poirot rose early, his attire impeccable as always, a crisp suit, a silk tie, and a hat tilted at precisely the right angle. He breakfasted on coffee and toast, declining the innkeeper's offer of kippers with a polite shudder. and set out for Hunterbury House. The estate lay a mile beyond the village, its wrought iron gates flanked by ancient elms. As Poirot approached, he took in the grandeur of the place, a Georgian manor of honey-colored stone, its windows glinting in the morning light. The gardens were a riot of roses and lavender, meticulously tended, yet the house itself seemed to brood, as if aware of the sorrow it had witnessed at the door. Poirot was met by Mrs. Bishop, the housekeeper, whose stern demeanor softened slightly at the sight of his card. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clipped. "I've heard of you. You're here about Miss Elinor, I suppose." "Precisement," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "I seek only the truth, madame. May I see the house, and perhaps speak with those who were present on the day of the tragedy?" Mrs. Bishop's lips tightened, but she nodded and led him. Inside, the hall was grand, with a sweeping staircase and portraits of long-dead Carlyles gazing down. Poirot's eyes darted about, noting the polished floors, the faint scent of beeswax, and the heavy silence that hung over the place. Mrs. Bishop guided him to the drawing-room, where the tea party had taken place, its French doors opening onto a terrace overlooking the garden. "It was here," Mrs. Bishop said, her voice low. Miss Elinor arranged a small tea for Miss Gerard. Mrs. Wellman wasn't meant to join them, but she insisted. She was fond of Mary, you see, treated her almost like a daughter. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Almost like a daughter, that is. Interesting, madame. And what was Mademoiselle Carlisle's manner that day?" Mrs. Bishop hesitated, her hands smoothing her apron as they had in the courtroom. She was quiet, perhaps a little strained. She and Mr. Roddy had quarreled, and Mary. Well, Mary was the cause, though I don't think the girl meant any harm. She was lovely, with a kind heart, but she turned heads without trying. "And the sandwiches," Poirot said, his voice gentle but insistent. "They were prepared by Mademoiselle Carlisle." "Yes, in the kitchen. Nurse Hopkins was there earlier, helping with Mrs. Wellman's tea, but she left before the sandwiches were made. Miss Elinor was alone, I believe." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Alone, or so it seemed. He stepped onto the terrace, where a wrought iron table stood, its surface still bearing faint rings from teacups. The garden stretched out before him, vibrant yet somehow mournful, the cypress trees casting long dark shadows. He pictured the scene: Elinor composed but wounded, Mary radiant and unaware, Mrs. Wellman, frail yet determined to join them, and the sandwiches, innocuous in appearance, yet deadly. Madame Poirot said, turning to Mrs. Bishop, "Who else was in the house that day?" "Servants, gardeners, visitors, only the usual staff," she replied. "Ted Bigland, the gardener, was working in the rose beds, but he didn't come inside. Nurse Hopkins was in and out, tending to Mrs. Wellman. Dr. Lord stopped by earlier to check on her, but he left before the tea party." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Dr. Lord, you say? He was here that morning." "Yes, but only briefly. He's a good man, devoted to his patients. He was terribly shaken when he heard what happened." "Most interesting," Poirot murmured. He thanked Mrs. Bishop and requested to see the kitchen, where the fatal sandwiches had been prepared. The room was spacious, with a long oak table and shelves lined with jars of preserves and condiments. Poirot's eyes lingered on a small jar of fish paste, its label slightly askew. He made a mental note to inquire about it later as he left. The kitchen. Nurse Hopkins arrived, her brisk manner a contrast to Mrs. Bishop's reserve. She was a sturdy woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone wary, "I suppose you're here to poke about. I've told the police everything I know, and yet Mademoiselle Poirot said," his voice smooth as silk, "sometimes the smallest detail, overlooked by others, is the key to the truth. Tell me, what was the mood of the tea party? Nurse Hopkins shrugged. Quiet, I'd say. Miss Elinor was polite, but you could see she was upset about Mr. Roddy. Mary was her usual self, cheerful, a bit dreamy. Mrs. Wellman was weaker than usual, but she wanted to be there. I left them to it, and went to check on some linens. And the teapot? Poirot asked. You handled it, perhaps? No, that was Miss Elinor's doing. I brewed the tea earlier, but she poured it. My hands were clean of it. Her tone was defensive, and Poirot noted it. He thanked her and took his leave, his mind a whirl of impressions. The house, the garden, the people all held secrets. He was certain. Dr. Lord's devotion, Nurse Hopkins' wariness, Mrs. Bishop's loyalty, and Elinor's silence formed a complex web, and somewhere within it lay the truth. As he walked back to the village, the cypress trees seemed to whisper, their shadows stretching like fingers across the path. Poirot's little gray cells were alight, and he knew that the call to action had been answered. The game, as he often said, was afoot. Chapter 3. The scene of the crime. The morning sun bathed Hunterbury House in a golden glow, softening the edges of its stern Georgian facade. Hercule Poirot stood at the gates, his eyes sweeping over the estate with the precision of an artist, studying a canvas. The gardens, vibrant with summer blooms, stretched toward the horizon, their beauty a stark contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded within these walls. Poirot's visit the previous day, guided by Mrs. Bishop, had been brief, but today he intended to linger, to let the house and its secrets speak to him. His small, neat figure moved with purpose as he passed through the gates, his cane tapping lightly on the gravel path. The front door opened before he could knock, revealing Mrs. Bishop, her face as unyielding as the stone lintel above her. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice tinged with resignation. Back again, I see. I suppose you'll want to poke about some more. Precisement, madam, Poirot replied, his tone courteous but firm. A crime, you see, is like a puzzle, and the pieces are often found in the places one least expects. May I examine the drawing-room and terrace once more? And perhaps, if it is not too much trouble, the kitchen as well. Mrs. Bishop's lips pursed, but she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. The hall was as grand as he remembered, its polished floor reflecting the light from a chandelier above. Poirot's gaze lingered on the portraits lining the walls, stern-faced Carlyles, their eyes seeming to follow him. He wondered what they would make of their last descendant, Elinor, now languishing under the shadow of a double murder charge. The drawing-room, with its high ceilings and heavy drapes, opened onto the terrace where the fatal tea party had taken place. Poirot stepped outside, the scent of roses and freshly cut grass enveloping him. The wrought iron table stood as it had been described, its surface weathered but clean, save for faint stains where teacups had rested. He closed his eyes, picturing the scene. Elinor, her face composed yet strained, pouring tea. Mary, radiant with youth, unaware of the danger in the sandwiches she ate. And Mrs. Wellman, frail but insistent, taking a sandwich meant for another. The image was vivid, but something jarred, a detail that did not fit. Poirot knelt beside the table, his fingers brushing the cool metal. The teapot, he murmured to himself. It was here, with Mademoiselle Carlisle's fingerprints. But why the teapot? The morphine was in the sandwiches. Nan. He straightened, his mind turning to the kitchen where the sandwiches had been prepared. He re-entered the house, Mrs. Bishop trailing him with a wary eye. The kitchen was a cavernous space, its oak tables scarred from years of use. Copper pots gleamed on hooks, and shelves held jars of preserves, their labels meticulously handwritten. Poirot's attention fixed on a small jar of fish paste, its lid slightly askew, as he had noted yesterday. He lifted it carefully, inhaling the faint, sharp odor. This paste, he said, turning to Mrs. Bishop, it was used for the sandwiches, yes. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly. Miss Elinor used it. She made the sandwiches herself, cucumber and fish paste, as Mary liked them. I saw her spreading it, though I was in and out, tending to other duties. And who else was in the kitchen that day? Poirot asked, his voice deceptively mild. Mrs. Bishop frowned. Nurse Hopkins was here earlier, preparing tea for Mrs. Wellman. She's particular about her brews, always fussing with the leaves. But she left before Miss Elinor started on the sandwiches. I don't recall anyone else. Poirot's mustache twitched, and the jar Madame it was opened before that day. Oh yes, it was a new jar, but Miss Elinor opened it that morning. I saw her do it. Poirot set the jar down, his mind racing. The fish paste was a key, he was certain, but its role was unclear. He moved to the pantry, where a tray of teacups and a silver teapot stood, cleaned but untouched since the police had examined them. He lifted the teapot, noting its weight, its elegant spout. The morphine, the coroner had said, was found in trace amounts here, but the lethal dose was in the sandwiches. Why, then, the teapot? It was a question that nagged at him, like a melody played slightly off-key. Leaving the kitchen, Poirot returned to the terrace, where he was joined by Nurse Hopkins, summoned by Mrs. Bishop at his request. The nurse's brisk manner was undimmed, her starched uniform crisp, despite the warmth of the day. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her eyes narrowing, I hope you're not wasting my time. I've patients to see too, and I've told the police all I know. Bien, sir, Mademoiselle, Poirot said, bowing slightly. But the memory, it is a curious thing. Sometimes it reveals new truths when questioned afresh. Tell me, if you please, about the tea party. You were present for part of it, yes. Nurse Hopkins crossed her arms. I was there earlier, helping Mrs. Wellman to the terrace. She was weak, but stubborn, wanted to be with Miss Elinor and Mary. I set out the tea things, then left to fetch some linens. When I came back, they were all eating, chatting quietly. Nothing seemed amiss until it happened. And you noticed nothing unusual? Poirot pressed, his green eyes fixed on her. No odd behavior, no strange taste in the tea or sandwiches? She shook her head, but her fingers tightened on her sleeve. Nothing. Miss Elinor poured the tea, and Mary ate the sandwiches. Mrs. Wellman took one, too, though I told her to stick to her diet. Then, within an hour, they were both gone. Her voice faltered, and Poirot noted the flicker of unease in her eyes. He changed tack. Mademoiselle Gerard. She was well liked. Yes. Did she have admirers, perhaps, who visited that day? Nurse Hopkins' lips thinned. Mary was a pretty girl, turned heads wherever she went. Ted Bigland, the gardener, was sweet on her, always hanging about. And Dr. Lord, well, he was fond of her, in his way. Used to bring her little gifts, books and such. But he was here for Mrs. Wellman that morning, not Mary. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. Dr. Lord, you say, he was fond of Mademoiselle Gerard? Oh, not like that, Nurse Hopkins said quickly. He's a professional man, devoted to his patients. But Mary had a way about her, made people care for her. It's no wonder Roddy Wellman lost his head over her, poor fool. Poirot nodded, storing the information. And Mademoiselle Carlisle, how did she seem with Mary that day? Nurse Hopkins hesitated, choosing her words. Polite, as always. Miss Elinor's a lady, never one to show her feelings openly. But you could tell she was hurt, with Roddy mooning over Mary. Still, I can't believe she'd do what they say she did. Thank you, mademoiselle, Poirot said, dismissing her with a nod. As she departed, he stood alone on the terrace, his gaze drifting to the cypress trees that lined the garden's edge. Their dark, tapering forms seemed to mourn, their shadows pooling like spilled ink. He thought of Elinor, her composure in the dock, and of Dr. Lord, whose plea had brought him here. The doctor's devotion was clear, but was it to Elinor alone, or did it conceal a deeper complexity? Poirot returned to the drawing-room, his fingers brushing the arm of a velvet chair where Mrs. Wellman had sat. He imagined her, a woman of wealth and will, weakened by illness, yet determined to join the tea party. Why had she eaten the sandwich? Was it mere caprice, or had someone ensured she would? The question gnawed at him, joined by another, who had truly handled the morphine. Elinor's purchase was documented, but access to the drug was not hers alone. A doctor, a nurse, even a housekeeper could have obtained it, given opportunity. He stepped back outside, his eyes scanning the garden. In the distance, he saw a figure bending over a rose bed. Ted Bigland, the gardener, his broad shoulders unmistakable. Poirot made a mental note to speak with him later. For now, he returned to the kitchen, drawn once more to the jar of fish paste. He opened it, the odor sharp and faintly chemical. It was a small thing, yet Poirot's instincts told him it was significant. He sealed the jar and slipped it into his pocket, resolving to have it analyzed by a chemist he trusted in London. As he left Hunterbury House, the sun was climbing higher, banishing the morning's softness. Poirot's mind was a whirl of impressions. The terrace, the teapot, the fish paste, the nurse's unease, the gardener's presence. Each was a thread, and he would weave them together until the pattern emerged. The scene of the crime had spoken, but its voice was cryptic, its secrets buried beneath layers of routine and deception. Poirot adjusted his hat, his resolve firm. The truth, he knew, was there, waiting for Hercule Poirot to uncover it with his meticulous care. Chapter 4. The will and the motive. Hercule Poirot sat in the small, oak-paneled parlor of the Red Lion Inn, a cup of tisane steaming gently before him. The morning's visit to Hunterbury House lingered in his mind, each detail a fragment of the puzzle he was determined to solve. The cypress trees, the terrace, the jar of fish paste tucked discreetly in his valisol, whispered of secrets yet to be unveiled. But now, his attention turned to a new avenue of inquiry, the will of Mrs. Laura Wellman, the linchpin of the prosecution's case against Elinor Carlisle. Poirot had requested a copy of the document from Mr. Seddon, the solicitor who had first urged him to take the case, and it had arrived that morning, delivered by a nervous clerk who seemed awed by the detective's reputation. Poirot adjusted his pince-nez and spread the papers before him, his fingers tracing the precise legal script. The will was straightforward, as befitted a woman of Mrs. Wellman's decisive character. The bulk of her considerable fortune, Hunterbury House, its lands, and a substantial sum in investments was bequeathed to her niece, Elinor Carlisle, in recognition of her devotion and care. A smaller legacy, a sum of £2,000, was left to Mary Gerard, described as the daughter of my late gardener, in gratitude for her companionship. There were minor bequests to the staff, including Mrs. Bishop, and a donation to a local charity. But the document's clarity left no room for ambiguity. Elinor stood to gain everything, while Mary's portion, though generous, was a mere fraction. Poirot leaned back, his eyes half closed. The prosecution had seized upon the will as the cornerstone of their motive. Elinor, they argued, had killed her aunt to secure her inheritance, and Mary to eliminate a rival for both the fortune and Roddy Wellman's affections. It was a narrative, as neat as a freshly pressed suit, yet Poirot mistrusted its simplicity. A motive so obvious, so perfectly aligned with the evidence, often concealed a deeper truth. He sipped his tisane, the herbal aroma soothing his senses, and considered the implications. Why had Mrs. Wellman left money to Mary? Was it truly gratitude, or something more personal? He rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at Maidensford's quiet streets. The village was stirring, with women carrying baskets to market, and a farmer leading a cart of hay. Poirot's thoughts drifted to Roddy Wellman. The absent fiancé's infatuation with Mary had, by all accounts, wounded Elinor deeply. Roddy was in London, Mr. Seddon had informed him, unwilling to face the trial or the scandal. His absence was telling, but Poirot needed to understand his role in the drama. He made a note to summon Roddy for an interview, though he suspected the young man would be evasive. A knock at the parlor door interrupted his reverie. Mrs. Bishop entered, her face set in its usual mask of disapproval, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "you asked to see me again. I've little time, with the house to manage, and all this trouble about Miss Elinor." "Merci, madame," Poirot said, gesturing to a chair. "I will not detain you long. I wish to speak of Mrs. Wellman's will. You were aware of its contents, perhaps?" Mrs. Bishop sat, her hands smoothing her apron in a familiar gesture. "I knew the gist of it," she admitted. Mrs. Wellman was open about her intentions. Miss Elinor was to have Hunter Berriott's only right, being family. The rest of us got our due, and Mary, well, Mrs. Wellman took a shine to her, always did. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "A shine, you say? Was there a particular bond between them? More than, perhaps, one might expect for a gardener's daughter?" Mrs. Bishop's lips tightened. "Mrs. Wellman was kind to Mary, treated her almost like a protégée, paid for her schooling even, which caused some talk in the village. Folk thought it odd, her taking such an interest, but Mrs. Wellman said Mary had potential, could make something of herself." "And Miss Elinor, how did she view this generosity?" Poirot asked, his voice soft but probing. "She never complained," Mrs. Bishop said firmly. "Miss Elinor's a lady, not one to make a fuss. But it can't have been easy, seeing her aunt dote on Mary, and then Roddy. Well, you know how he carried on." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the housekeeper's words. "And the day of the tea party, Madame, did Mrs. Wellman speak of her will, or of Mary?" "Not that I heard," Mrs. Bishop replied. "She was frail, her speech sells speculative fiction. But she seemed cheerful enough, talking about the garden party they'd had the week before. I wasn't here when it happened, but I know she took one of those sandwiches, same as Mary." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Most interesting," he murmured. He thanked Mrs. Bishop and dismissed her, his thoughts turning to the will's implications. The legacy to Mary suggested a deeper connection, perhaps one that Elinor had resented more than she showed. He resolved to visit Mr. Seddon's office in the village, to inquire further about the will's history and any prior drafts. The solicitor's office was a modest affair, tucked above a bakery, its air heavy with the scent of fresh bread. Mr. Seddon, a wiry man with a perpetually harried expression, welcomed Poirot with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, shaking his hand, "I trust you're making progress. Miss Carlisle's case grows more dire by the day." "I proceed," Monsieur Poirot replied, settling into a chair. "The will of Madame Wellmanette is most clear, but I wonder if there were earlier versions, perhaps less favorable to Mademoiselle Carlisle." Mr. Seddon's brow furrowed. "There was an earlier draft, yes, drawn up a year ago. It was similar. But Mary Gerard's legacy was smaller, £500. I believe. Mrs. Wellman revised it after her first stroke, saying Mary deserved more for her loyalty. I advised against it, fearing it might cause friction with Elinor, but Mrs. Wellman was adamant." "And who knew of this change?" Poirot asked, his eyes sharp. "Only myself and Mrs. Wellman," Seddon said. "She was discreet, not wanting to upset Elinor. I don't believe Mary knew either, until after the fact." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The increased legacy could have been a spark, igniting jealousy or fear in someone's heart. But whose? Elinor's, as the prosecution claimed, or another's? Someone who saw Mary as a threat to more than just an inheritance. He requested the coroner's report, which Seddon promised to obtain, and took his leave. his thoughts turning to the medical details of the case. As he stepped into the street, Poirot spotted Dr. Peter Lord emerging from the village pharmacy, a small bottle in his hand. The doctor's face brightened at the sight of Poirot, though his eyes held a trace of anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," he called, hurrying over. "Have you found anything? Any hope for Elinor?" "Patience, doctor," Poirot said, his tone calm but firm. "The truth is like a delicate flower, it requires careful tending. Tell me, you were close to Madame Woman. Did she ever speak of her reasons for favoring Mademoiselle Gerard?" Dr. Lord's jaw tightened, and he looked away briefly. "She saw Mary as a kind of daughter, I think. Mrs. Wellman had no children of her own, and Mary was bright, eager to learn. I believe she wanted to give her a chance at a better life. And this did not trouble Mademoiselle Carlisle." Poirot pressed. Dr. Lord hesitated, his fingers tightening around the bottle. "Elinor was gracious, always, but it must have stung, knowing her aunt's affection was shared. And with Roddy's feelings, well, it was a difficult time." Poirot observed the doctor closely, noting the slight flush in his cheeks, the way his eyes avoided direct contact. "You knew Mademoiselle Gerard well, yes? She was perhaps a friend." "She was," Dr. Lord said softly. "A good soul, full of dreams. I wanted to help her, as Mrs. Wellman did. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, my heart is with Elinor. I'd do anything to see her free." "Anything," Poirot echoed, his voice barely a whisper. He thanked the doctor and turned toward the inn, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The will had clarified the motive, but it also broadened the net of suspicion. Elinor stood to lose much: her fiancé's, her aunt's affection, and perhaps a portion of her inheritance. But others had motives too. Roddy wounded by Mary's indifference. Dr. Lord, whose devotion to Elinor might hide other feelings. Even Mrs. Bishop, fiercely loyal to the Carlisle name. And Mary herself had her dreams of a new life threaten someone's plans. Poirot reached the inn as the sun dipped low, casting the village in a warm amber light. He sat at his small desk, spreading out his notes: the will, the tea party, the morphine, the fish paste. The motive was clear, but the hand that wielded it remained elusive. He would need the coroner's report, and perhaps a conversation with Roddy Wellman, to unravel the next thread. The cypress trees of Hunterbury loomed in his memory, their shadows a reminder of the darkness he sought to dispel. The truth was near, he felt it, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until it was laid bare. Chapter 5. The doctor's devotion. The village of Maidensford lay hushed under a veil of late morning mist, its rooftops barely visible as Hercule Poirot made his way along the narrow lane toward Dr. Peter Lord's surgery. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and blooming honeysuckle. But Poirot's mind was far from the pastoral charm of the countryside. The will of Mrs. Laura Wellman, with its generous bequest to Mary Gerard, had deepened the mystery, suggesting motives that extended beyond Elinor Carlisle's supposed jealousy. The coroner's report, promised by Mr. Seddon, had not yet arrived. But Poirot's little grey cells were already piecing together the fragments of the case: the fatal tea party, the morphine, the fish paste, and the elusive truth that seemed to slip through his fingers like mist. Dr. Lord's surgery was a modest building, its red brick facade softened by ivy. A brass plaque by the door announced his profession with understated dignity. Poirot knocked, and a young nurse, her cap slightly askew, ushered him into a waiting room where the scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint aroma of lavender. The room was sparsely furnished: a few wooden chairs, a table strewn with outdated magazines, but it was clean, almost obsessively so, reflecting the doctor's meticulous nature. Dr. Lord appeared moments later, his white coat slightly rumpled, his hazel eyes bright with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, I wasn't expecting you so soon. Have you news about Elinor's case? News, Nan, Poirot replied, his tone smooth as polished glass. But questions, I seek to understand, Doctor, and you, I believe, can illuminate certain shadows. May we speak privately? Dr. Lord nodded, leading Poirot to a small office at the back of the surgery. The room was cluttered with medical books, a stethoscope draped over a chair, and a desk piled with patient files. A single window overlooked a garden where roses bloomed in defiant splendor. Poirot settled into a chair, his posture impeccable, his eyes fixed on the doctor with an intensity that belied his courteous smile. You are devoted to Mademoiselle Carlisle, Poirot began, his voice gentle but probing. This is evident in your words, your actions. But I must ask, Doctor, about your connection to Mademoiselle Gerard. She was, I understand, a patient of yours, but also a friend, perhaps. Dr. Lord's fingers tightened briefly on the edge of his desk, a gesture Poirot noted with care. Mary was special, he said, his voice low. She had a brightness about her, a kind of hope that made you want to help her. I treated her for minor ailments, colds, the usual things, but we talked. She wanted to study, to leave Maidensford, and make something of herself. I admired that. And you gave her gifts, I am told, Poirot said, his head tilted slightly. Books, perhaps, to aid her ambitions. A flush crept up Dr. Lord's neck, but he met Poirot's gaze steadily. Yes, a few books, novels, mostly things she enjoyed. It was nothing improper, Monsieur Poirot. I wanted to encourage her, as Mrs. Wellman did. Mary deserved better than a life tied to this village. Or nodded, his expression unreadable. And Mademoiselle Carlisle, did she know of your kindness to Mary? Did it, perhaps, cause her pain? Dr. Lord's jaw tightened, and he looked away, toward the window. Elinor knew I was fond of Mary, but not in the way Roddy was. I told her it was nothing romantic, and she believed me. Elinor's not petty, she's generous, even when she's hurting. But I won't lie, Monsieur Poirot. Seeing Roddy fawn over Mary was hard for her, and I hated watching her suffer. Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his quickening interest. You hated it, Doctor. Enough perhaps to wish Mademoiselle Gerard gone. The question hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. Dr. Lord's eyes widened, and his hands, resting on the desk, trembled slightly. That's absurd, he said, his voice rising. I cared for Mary, and I'd never harm anyone, least of all to hurt Elinor. I asked you to help her, not to accuse me. Calm yourself, Monsieur Poirot said, raising a placating hand. I accuse no one yet. I seek only to understand the heart, for it is there that motives are born. Tell me, if you please, about the day of the tea party. You were at Hunterbury earlier, yes? Dr. Lord took a deep breath, steadying himself. Yes, I visited Mrs. Wellman that morning. She was weaker than usual, complaining of pain. I adjusted her medication, morphine for comfort, but a small dose, carefully measured. I left before the tea party, as I had patients to see here. And the morphine, Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. It was kept at Hunterbury, in a secure place. In a locked cabinet in Mrs. Wellman's room, Dr. Lord replied. Only I and Nurse Hopkins had keys, though Elinor knew where it was, as she helped with her aunt's care. But the amount used in the murders was far more than I prescribed. Someone must have obtained it elsewhere. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Elsewhere, or perhaps from the cabinet, Doctor. You are certain it was secure? Dr. Lord hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. As secure as it could be. I checked it that morning, and everything was in order. But I suppose someone could have taken it, if they knew where to look. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And who, Doctor, knew where to look? Mademoiselle Carlisle, of course. Nurse Hopkins. But others. Visitors, perhaps, who came to see Madame Bowman. No one else, Dr. Lord said firmly. The staff weren't allowed in her room without permission, and there were no visitors that day, not that I saw. Only Ted Bigland was about, working in the garden, but he never came inside. Poirot nodded, filing away the information. And your feelings for Mademoiselle Gerard, tell me, doctor, were they truly platonic, as you say? Or did she, perhaps, stir something deeper? Dr. Lord's face darkened, and he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, my heart is with Elinor. Mary was a friend, nothing more. I won't have you twisting my words to make me a suspect. I asked you to save Elinor, not to interrogate me like some criminal. Poirot remained seated, his expression calm but unyielding. The truth, doctor, is not always pleasant. It requires us to examine all possibilities, even those that pain us. I will do as you ask. I will seek to save Mademoiselle Carlisle, but I must follow the path where it leads. You understand, we. Dr. Lord sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping. I understand, he said quietly. Just find the truth, Monsieur Poirot, for Elinor's sake. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with a precise gesture. I shall, doctor, and I thank you for your candor. One last question. The fish paste used in the sandwiches, did you ever see it, taste it, perhaps? Dr. Lord frowned, puzzled. No, I wasn't there for the tea party. I don't know anything about the fish paste. Why do you ask? A small detail, Poirot said, smiling faintly. But in a case such as this, the smallest detail may be the key. Au revoir, doctor. As Poirot left the surgery, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky of unblemished blue. He walked slowly, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, his mind a whirl of impressions. Dr. Lord's devotion to Elinor was genuine. Of that Poirot was certain, but his agitation when questioned about Mary Gerard was revealing. Was it guilt, fear, or simply the strain of the trial? The morphine, too, posed questions. If the cabinet was secure, how had the lethal dose been obtained? And the fish paste, with its faint chemical odor, lingered in his thoughts like an unresolved chord. Poirot decided to visit the village chemist, a small shop near the church where Elinor had purchased the morphine. The chemist, Mr. Hargreaves, was a wiry man with a nervous manner, his glasses perched precariously on his nose. Monsieur Poirot, he said, wiping his hands on his apron, I've told the police everything. Miss Carlisle bought the morphine, a small amount, for her aunt's pain. It was all proper, with Dr. Lord's prescription, and no one else purchased morphine that week? Poirot asked, his eyes sharp. Mr. Hargreaves shook his head. No, sir, it's not something we sell often, and I keep careful records. Only Miss Carlisle, and that was weeks before the tragedy. Poirot thanked him and stepped back into the sunlight, his mind turning to Nurse Hopkins. Her access to the morphine cabinet, her presence at Hunterbury, and her evasive manner made her a figure of interest. He resolved to speak with her again. But first, he would await the coroner's report, which might shed light on the exact nature of the poison. As he walked toward the Red Lion Inn, the cypress trees of Hunterbury loomed in his memory, their dark forms a reminder of the shadow that hung over Elinor Carlisle. Dr. Lord's devotion was a thread in the tapestry, but whether it was a thread of salvation or deceit, Poirot could not yet say. The truth, he knew, was close, and he would pursue it with relentless precision. Chapter 6. A hidden truth. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Red Lion Inn's parlor, casting delicate patterns across the worn carpet. Hercule Poirot sat at a small mahogany table, his fingers drumming lightly as he reviewed his notes from the morning's encounter with Dr. Peter Lord. The doctor's agitation, his fervent defense of Elinor Carlisle, and his guarded responses about Mary Gerard had sharpened Poirot's suspicions. There was a truth beneath the surface, a hidden current that tugged at the edges of the case. The morphine, the fish paste, the locked cabinet all pointed to a deliberate act, but by whom? Poirot's little gray cells hummed with possibilities, each one tested and discarded until it fit the puzzle's emerging shape. He had sent the jar of fish paste to a trusted chemist in London for analysis, suspecting it held a clue to the poison's delivery. The coroner's report, delivered by Mr. Seddon's clerk just before lunch, lay before him, its clinical prose detailing the grim facts. Both Mrs. Wellman and Mary Gerard had died of morphine poisoning, with lethal doses detected in their stomachs. Traces of the drug were found in the teapot, but the sandwiches, consumed by both victims, were the primary source. The report noted no other substances, yet Poirot's instincts told him to wait for the chemist's findings. The faint chemical odor in the fish paste was not morphine, he was certain, but something else, something cunningly chosen to mask or enhance the poison's effect. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the parlor door. Nurse Hopkins entered, her starched uniform crisp, despite the day's warmth, her expression a blend of wariness and defiance. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clipped, "Mrs. Bishop said you wanted to see me again. I've patients to attend, so I hope this won't take long." "Merci, Mademoiselle," Poirot replied, rising with a courteous bow. "I appreciate your time. Please, sit. I seek only to clarify certain details about the day of the tragedy at Hunterbury House. Your observations, as a woman of medical training, are most valuable." Nurse Hopkins sat, her posture rigid, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I've told you what I know," she said. "I was there to care for Mrs. Wellman, helped set out the tea things, and left before the sandwiches were served. I don't see what more I can add." Poirot tilted his head, his green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. "The memory, mademoiselle, is like a garden, it yields new blooms when tended carefully. Let us revisit the morning of the tea party. You were in the kitchen, preparing tea for Madame Wellman. Did you, perhaps, notice the fish paste that Mademoiselle Carlisle used for the sandwiches?" Nurse Hopkins' eyes flickered, a brief shadow crossing her face. "The fish paste, I saw it on the table, yes. Miss Elinor opened a new jar. She said Mary liked it. I didn't touch it myself. I was busy with the tea, making sure it was just right for Mrs. Wellman." "And the morphine," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. "You had access to the cabinet in Madame Wellman's room. You and Dr. Lord alone held the keys. Was it secure that morning?" "Of course it was," she snapped, her cheeks flushing. "I checked it myself when I gave Mrs. Wellman her dosomol, just as Dr. Lord prescribed. The cabinet was locked when I left, and I had my key with me. Miss Elinor knew where it was, though she'd helped with her aunt's care." "Often enough," Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And during the tea party, you returned briefly, you said. What did you see? The mood, the interactions? Describe them, if you please." Nurse Hopkins hesitated, her fingers tightening on her sleeve. "It was quiet, as I told you. Miss Elinor was pouring tea. Mary was talking about her plans to study in London, and Mrs. Wellman was listening, smiling a bit. They seemed normal, I suppose, though you could feel the tension. Miss Elinor was polite, but distant. Mary didn't notice, she never did, bless her. She was too caught up in her dreams." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Dreams, you say?" "Mademoiselle Gerard spoke often of leaving Maidensford." "Oh yes," Nurse Hopkins said, her tone softening slightly. "She wanted to be a nurse, like me, or perhaps a teacher. Mrs. Wellman's legacy gave her the means to try. It was a generous gift, though it caused some talk in the village. Folk thought it odd, her getting so much." "And you, mademoiselle," Poirot said, leaning forward, "did you think it odd? Or did you know why Madame Wellman favored her so?" Nurse Hopkins' eyes narrowed, and for a moment Poirot thought she might refuse to answer. Mrs. Wellman never said outright, she replied carefully, but she treated Mary like family. Some whispered Mary might be a relation, a distant cousin or such. But I never saw proof. Mrs. Wellman just liked her spirit, I think. Poirot's mind seized on the hint of a deeper connection. A relation rumored, not confirmed, but a motive. For resentment, perhaps, if Elinor felt her aunt's affection slipping away. He shifted his approach. Let us speak of Dr. Lord. He was close to Mademoiselle Gerard. You mentioned his gifts, his visits. Was there, perhaps, more than friendship there? Nurse Hopkins' lips pursed, and she leaned back, her arms crossing. Dr. Lord's a good man, professional to a fault. He liked Mary, sure who didn't. She had a way of drawing people in. He'd bring her books, talk to her about her studies, but I never saw anything improper. His heart's with Miss Elinor, anyone can see that. He was torn up when Mary died, but it's Elinor he's fighting for now. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Torn up, you say? How did he react when he learned of the deaths? He was shocked, like we all were, Nurse Hopkins said, her voice steadying. He came to Hunterbury when I sent for him, after Mrs. Wellman and Mary took ill. He tried to save them, but it was too late. He looked well, like he'd seen a ghost. Kept saying it didn't make sense, that Elinor couldn't have done it. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. The doctor's shock, his insistence on Elinor's innocence genuine, or a performance to deflect suspicion. He decided to probe further. One final matter, mademoiselle. The teapot, you said you prepared the tea, but Mademoiselle Carlisle poured it. Did you handle it after it was brewed? No, she said quickly. I set it out with the cups and left. Miss Elinor took over from there. I didn't touch it again until after, when I helped clear up. The police found the morphine traces. Later, Poirot's fingers steepled, his gaze unwavering. And you noticed nothing unusual in the kitchen? No strange smells? No jars out of place? Nurse Hopkins shook her head, but her eyes darted to the side, a fleeting gesture that Poirot caught. Nothing, she said. It was a busy morning, and I was focused on Mrs. Wellman. I didn't have time to fuss over the kitchen. Mercy. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, rising with a polite smile. You have been most helpful. I will not detain you further. As Nurse Hopkins left, her footsteps brisk on the wooden floor, Poirot sat back, his mind racing. Her evasiveness, subtle but undeniable, suggested she knew more than she revealed. The mention of a possible relation between Mary and Mrs. Wellman was new, a thread to tug. Had Elinor known of this rumor? Had it fueled a deeper resentment? And Dr. Lord's connection to Mary platonic, as he claimed, or something more? The doctor's trembling hands, his fervent defense of Elinor, hinted at a man caught in a tangle of emotions. Poirot's thoughts turned to the fish paste, still under analysis in London. If it contained a second substance, as he suspected it, could point to a mind more cunning than Elinor's, one with medical knowledge, perhaps. Nurse Hopkins, with her access to the morphine cabinet and her presence in the kitchen, was a candidate, but her motive was unclear. Dr. Lord, too, had the expertise and opportunity, and his devotion to Elinor could mask a darker intent. Poirot made a note to seek out Ted Bigland, the gardener, whose love for Mary might reveal another perspective. He stepped to the window, gazing out at the village green, where children played under the watchful eyes of their mothers. The simplicity of Maidensford belied the complexity of its secrets. Poirot felt the weight of the case, the urgency of Elinor's plight, but his resolve was unshaken. A hidden truth lay buried, and he would unearth it with the precision of a surgeon. The cypress trees of Hunterbury, dark and mournful, seemed to call to him, their shadows a challenge he would meet with his meticulous mind. Chapter 7. The Gardener's Tale. The late afternoon light, cast a warm glow over the gardens of Hunterbury House, where the roses bloomed in defiant splendor against the somber backdrop of the cypress trees. Hercule Poirot, his hat tilted at a precise angle, walked the gravel path toward the rose beds, where Ted Bigland, the gardener, was at work. The young man's broad shoulders bent over a cluster of crimson blooms, his hands deftly pruning with a pair of shears. Poirot had chosen this moment to seek him out, sensing that the gardener, a peripheral figure in the tragedy, might hold a key to the puzzle that consumed him. The interviews with Dr. Lord and Nurse Hopkins had deepened the mystery, their words laced with half-truths and evasions. Now Poirot sought a fresh perspective, one untainted by the medical intricacies or the loyalties of Hunterbury's inner circle. Ted Bigland straightened as Poirot approached, wiping his brow with a calloused hand. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was open but guarded, his blue eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of the diminutive detective. "You're that foreign gentleman, ain't you?" he said, his voice carrying the soft burr of the Maidensford dialect, "the one poking about Miss Elinor's trouble?" "Precisement," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I seek the truth. Monsieur Bigland, you were close to Mademoiselle Mary Gerard, I understand. May we speak?" "I assure you, I wish only to understand what happened that day at Hunterbury." Ted set down his shears, his expression softening. "At Mary's name, I'll talk," he said, gesturing to a nearby bench beneath an ancient yew. "For Mary's sake, if nothing else. She didn't deserve what happened to her." They sat, the bench cool beneath the tree's shade. Poirot studied the gardener, noting the strength in his frame, the quiet grief in his eyes. Ted was young, perhaps 25, with the rugged simplicity of a man tied to the land. His hands, rough and stained with earth, spoke of honest labor. But Poirot knew that even honest men could harbor dark impulses. "You loved Mademoiselle Gerard," Poirot said, his voice gentle but direct. "This is known in the village. Tell me about her, if you please, her dreams, her fears, her place in this tragedy." Ted's gaze dropped to his hands, his fingers twisting a blade of grass. "Mary she was like sunlight," he said softly. "Always smiling, always talking about what she'd do when she left Maidensford. She wanted to study, be a nurse, or a teacher, like Nurse Hopkins. Mrs. Wellman's money was going to make that possible, and Mary was over the moon about it. We used to talk, you know, when I'd be working in the garden and she'd come by. She'd tell me about books she'd read, places she wanted to see." Poirot nodded, his eyes fixed on Ted's face. "And this legacy from Madame Wellman, it caused talk, yes. Some thought it strange, her favoring Mary so." Ted's jaw tightened, and he nodded. "Aye, there was talk. Folk said maybe Mary was more than just the gardener's daughter to Mrs. Wellman's, some kind of kin, though no one had proof. I didn't care. Mary was happy, and that's what mattered. But it made things hard for Miss Elinor, I reckon. She was always kind to Mary. But you could see it stung, knowing her aunt thought so much of her." "And Monsieur Roddy Wellman," Poirot said, his tone measured. "His feelings for Mary, how did they affect you?" Ted's hands clenched, the grass blade snapping in his fingers. "Roddy was a fool," he said, his voice low but fierce. "He'd no right to chase after Mary, not when he was promised to Miss Elinor. Mary didn't encourage him. Mind, she told me she didn't care for him that way. But he kept at it, sending her notes, turning up where she was. It made my blood boil, seeing her troubled like that." Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his quickening interest. "Troubled, you say? Did Mademoiselle Gerard fear Monsieur Wellman? Or perhaps another?" Ted hesitated, his eyes flickering with something Poirot could not quite name. Anger, perhaps, or fear. "She didn't fear Roddy, not really," he said. "She just wanted him to leave her be. But there was someone else. She never said who, but she'd get quiet sometimes, like she was worried. I asked her once, but she just smiled and said it was nothing. I didn't press her." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And Dr. Lord? He was kind to Mary, bringing her gifts, encouraging her ambitions. Did this trouble you, as Roddy's attentions did?" Ted's face darkened, and he shifted on the bench. "Dr. Lord was always about, wasn't he? Bringing her books, talking to her like she was something special. I didn't like it, but Mary said he was just being kind, like a brother. I trusted her, but, well, he was too close, if you ask me. Always hovering when she was at Hunterbury." Poirot's mind seized on the word hovering. It echoed Nurse Hopkins' description of the doctor, a man whose devotion to Elinor might mask other feelings. "And the day of the tea party," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. "You were in the garden, yes. Did you see anyone near the house who should not have been there?" Ted shook his head, his expression grim. "I was working the far beds, near the orchard. Didn't see much of the house till I heard the commotion, when Nurse Hopkins came running out, shouting for help. By then Mary and Mrs. Wellman they were gone." His voice broke, and he looked away, toward the cypress trees that loomed. In the distance, Poirot observed the young man's grief, genuine and raw, but his instincts probed deeper. "You did not enter the house that day, monsieur, not even to speak with Mary?" "No," Ted said firmly. "I stayed outside. Miss Elinor wouldn't have liked me coming in, not with the tea party and all. I saw Mary from a distance, looking pretty as ever, but that was all." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing Ted's words. The gardener's love for Mary was clear, as was his resentment of Dr. Lord and Roddy Wellman. But his alibi, working in the distant orchard, seemed solid to solid. Perhaps Poirot made a mental note to verify it with the other gardeners. 1. "Last question, Monsieur Bigland," he said. "The fish paste used in the sandwiches, did you ever see it, perhaps in the kitchen, or hear Mary speak of it?" Ted frowned, puzzled. "Fish paste? No, I don't know anything about that. Mary liked it. I suppose she'd eat those sandwiches Miss Elinor made sometimes. But I never saw the jar, and she never mentioned it." "Mercy," Poirot said, rising with a small bow. "You have been most helpful. I will trouble you no further." Ted nodded, returning to his roses, but his eyes followed Poirot as the detective walked back toward the house. Poirot's mind was a whirl of impressions. Ted's love, his anger, his vague hint of Mary's unnamed worry. The gardener was no killer, Poirot felt, but his story added a new layer to the mystery. Who had Mary feared? And why had Dr. Lord's kindness provoked such resentment in Ted? As Poirot reached the terrace, a messenger arrived from London, bearing a sealed envelope from the chemist. Poirot opened it with care, his eyes scanning the report. The fish paste contained traces of apomorphine, a substance not mentioned in the coroner's findings but known to induce vomiting or mask other poisons. Poirot's heart quickened. This was no accident. It pointed to a mind with medical knowledge, one that had planned the murders with chilling precision. Dr. Lord and Nurse Hopkins, both with access to such substances, rose higher in his suspicions. Poirot slipped the report into his pocket and gazed out at the garden, where the cypress trees stood like sentinels of sorrow. The truth was closer now, a hidden truth buried beneath layers of love, jealousy, and deception. Ted Bigland's tale had illuminated one corner of the puzzle, but others remained in shadow. Poirot resolved to confront Nurse Hopkins again, too. Press her on the apomorphine and her evasive manner. The game, as he often said, was afoot, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until every secret was laid bare. Chapter 8. The poisoned sandwich. The evening sky over Maidensford was a tapestry of deepening blues, streaked with threads of crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the parlor of the Red Lion Inn, the chemist's report on the fish paste spread before him like a map to a hidden treasure. The discovery of apomorphine, a substance not noted in the coroner's findings, had shifted the puzzle's contours, pointing to a mind both cunning and medically adept. Morphine alone had killed Mrs. Wellman and Mary Gerard, but the apomorphine suggested a deliberate attempt to obscure or enhance the poison's delivery. Poirot's little gray cells buzzed with the implications, each detail of the fatal tea party taking on new significance. He closed his eyes, reconstructing the scene in his meticulous mind. The terrace at Hunterbury House, bathed in summer light. Elinor Carlisle, her face a mask of composure, preparing sandwiches with fish paste. Mary Gerard, radiant and unaware, eating with relish. And Mrs. Wellman, frail yet defiant, taking a sandwich not meant for her. The teapot, with its traces of morphine, had been a distraction. Poirot now suspected a sleight of hand to focus suspicion on Elinor. The true vehicle of death was the sandwiches, laced with both morphine and apomorphine. The latter perhaps intended to induce symptoms that would mask the morphine's slower effects. Poirot rose, pacing the small parlor, his cane tapping softly on the carpet. The apomorphine was key, but its presence raised questions. Who had access to such a substance? Dr. Peter Lord, with his medical expertise and presence at Hunterbury that morning, was an obvious candidate. Nurse Hopkins, too, with her knowledge and access to the morphine cabinet, could not be dismissed. Yet neither had a clear motive, lest Dr. Lord's devotion to Elinor concealed a darker obsession, or Nurse Hopkins harbored a grudge unknown to Poirot. The gardener, Ted Bigland, lacked the expertise, and Elinor herself, though implicated by the evidence, seemed an unlikely architect of such a sophisticated scheme. He paused by the window, gazing out at the village green, now cloaked in twilight. The cypress trees of Hunterbury lingered in his memory, their dark forms a silent chorus to the tragedy. Poirot decided to return to the kitchen at Hunterbury, to examine the scene of the sandwich's preparation with fresh eyes. He donned his hat, adjusted his tie, and set out into the cool evening. The village quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog. Hunterbury House was a shadow against the sky, its windows dark except for a single light in the servants' quarters. Mrs. Bishop, ever vigilant, answered Poirot's knock, her face etched with weary resignation. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice sharp, "it's late for visits. What do you want now?" "Pardon, madame," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "I must see the kitchen once more. A small matter, but one that may prove vital. Will you permit me?" Mrs. Bishop sighed, but led him through the silent hall to the kitchen, where a single lamp cast a warm glow over the oak table. The shelves, lined with jars and tins, were as Poirot remembered, but he approached them with renewed purpose. He scanned the condiments, noting their orderly arrangement, then turned to the sink, where dishes from the tea party had been washed. "The tray, madame," he said. "The one used for the tea party, where is it now?" Mrs. Bishop pointed to a cupboard. "There, with the other silver. The police looked at it, but it's been cleaned since." Poirot opened the cupboard, retrieving a heavy silver tray, its surface gleaming but bearing faint scratches from years of use. He examined it closely, his fingers tracing the edges. And the teapot, the cups, they were all cleaned after the tragedy. "Yes," Mrs. Bishop said, her tone defensive. "I saw to it myself, once the police were done. We couldn't leave things in a mess, could we?" Poirot nodded, his mind noting the loss of potential clues. He returned to the table, picturing Elinor at work, spreading fish paste on bread. "You saw Mademoiselle Carlisle prepare the sandwiches, yes. Did anyone else enter the kitchen while she worked?" Mrs. Bishop shook her head. "Not that I saw. Nurse Hopkins was here earlier, fussing with the tea, but she left before Miss..." Elinor started. "I was in and out, tending to Mrs. Wellman's room. But I remember Miss Elinor alone, slicing bread, spreading that paste." "And the jar," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. "You are certain it was new, opened that day?" "Certain as I can be," Mrs. Bishop replied. "Miss Elinor took it from the pantry herself. I heard the lid pop when she opened it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A new jar, yet contaminated with apomorphine. Someone had tampered with it before Elinor's hands touched it, or else the tampering occurred in the chaos of the tea party's preparation. He thanked Mrs. Bishop and asked to be left alone, promising not to disturb the household further. As she departed, Poirot stood in the center of the kitchen, his senses alert. The faint chemical odor he had detected in the fish paste lingered in his memory, a clue that refused to be ignored. He moved to the pantry, where the shelves held an array of preserves and condiments, their labels faded but legible. He examined each jar, searching for signs of tampering: loose lids, smudged labels, anything amiss. Most were untouched, their seals intact, but one small jar of mustard caught his eye. Its lid was slightly askew, and a faint residue clung to the rim, barely visible in the lamplight. Poirot lifted it carefully, inhaling a sharp, unfamiliar scent, not mustard, but something medicinal. He sealed it in a handkerchief and slipped it into his pocket, resolving to send it for analysis alongside the fish paste. As he left the kitchen, the house seemed to close in around him, its silence heavy with secrets. Poirot stepped onto the terrace, where the night air was cool and fragrant with jasmine. He pictured the tea party again, but now with a new lens: the sandwiches, prepared by Elinor but perhaps tampered with by another; the teapot, a false trail to incriminate her; and Mrs. Wellman, an unintended victim whose death complicated the killer's plan. The apomorphine suggested a medical mind, but it also pointed to a motive beyond simple jealousy. Was it greed, revenge, or something deeper, a hidden truth that tied Mary Gerard to Mrs. Wellman in ways no one had yet admitted? Poirot's thoughts turned to Nurse Hopkins. Her evasiveness, her access to the morphine cabinet, and her presence in the kitchen made her a figure of interest. He recalled her fleeting glance when questioned about the fish paste, a sign of unease that suggested knowledge, if not guilt. Dr. Lord, too, remained a puzzle. His devotion to Elinor was clear, but his closeness to Mary, his medical expertise, and his trembling hands hinted at a conflict within. Ted Bigland's love for Mary added another layer, though his lack of medical knowledge made him an unlikely puisonner. As Poirot walked back to the village, the stars glittered above, their cold light a contrast to the warmth of his resolve. The poisoned sandwich was the heart of the crime, a simple act made complex by the addition of apomorphine. Someone had planned this with care, framing Elinor while ensuring Mary's death, and, inadvertently, Mrs. Wellman's. The truth was near, Poirot felt, but it required one more step, one more confrontation to bring it into the light. He would summon Nurse Hopkins again, and perhaps Dr. Lord, to test his growing suspicions. The cypress trees, dark against the night sky, seemed to nod in approval, their shadows urging him onward in his quest for justice. Chapter 9. A crack in the facade. The morning mist clung to Maidensford like a shroud, softening the outlines of its stone cottages and muffling the clatter of early market carts. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the damp chill, sat in the parlor of the Red Lion, in a fresh cup of tisane steaming before him. His mind was a whirl of precision, each thought a carefully placed pin in the map of the Hunterbury tragedy. The discovery of apomorphine in the fish paste had shifted the case's axis, pointing to a killer with medical knowledge and a plan far subtler than the prosecution's crude narrative of jealousy. The mustard jar, now en route to his London chemist for analysis, added another layer of intrigue. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation, sensing that the truth, like the mist outside, was beginning to lift. He had summoned Nurse Hopkins for another interview, this time at the inn to avoid the oppressive atmosphere of Hunterbury House. Her evasiveness during their last encounter had not escaped him. The fleeting glance, the tightened fingers, the too quick denial of noticing anything unusual in the kitchen. Poirot trusted his instincts, and they told him Nurse Hopkins knew more than she had revealed. As he awaited her arrival, he reviewed the coroner's report and the chemist's findings, his fingers tracing the words as if they might yield their secrets through touch alone. A sharp knock announced Nurse Hopkins, her starched uniform as crisp as ever, though her eyes betrayed a wariness that bordered on fear. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice clipped, "I can't imagine what more you need from me. I've told you everything, and I've patience waiting." "Mercy, Mademoiselle Poirot," replied, rising with a courteous bow. "I will be brief, but the truth, it is a delicate thing, requiring patience. Please, sit. I wish to speak of the tea party once more, and of a small matter, the fish paste." Nurse Hopkins sat, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly. "The fish paste again," she said, her tone edged with irritation. "I told you, I saw Miss Elinor open the jar, but I didn't touch it. I was busy with Mrs. Wellman's tea." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching slightly. "Oui, you said as much. But I have learned something new, mademoiselle." The fish paste contained apomorphine, a substance not mentioned in the coroner's report. "It is curious, Nan, a medical substance, one that requires knowledge to use. You, with your training, would know of it." "Yes." Nurse Hopkins' face paled and her fingers tightened until her knuckles whitened. "Apomorphine," she said, her voice faltering. I don't know anything about that. I'm a nurse, not a chemist. I deal with bandages and broths, not fancy poisons." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "Come, mademoiselle, let us be frank. Apomorphine is not a common household item. It is used to induce vomiting, or perhaps to mask other symptoms. Someone placed it in the fish paste, knowing it would be used for the sandwiches. You were in the kitchen that morning. Did you see anyone at all near the pantry?" Her eyes darted to the side, a gesture Poirot had come to recognize as her tell. "No one," she said, too quickly. "It was just me and Miss Elinor." "And Mrs. Bishop popping in and out?" "I told you, I was focused on the tea. I didn't notice the pantry." Poirot's voice softened, but his words were sharp. "And yet, mademoiselle, I find it strange. A nurse, trained to observe, misses nothing in a sick room but fails to notice a stranger in the kitchen. Or perhaps it was not a stranger. Perhaps it was someone familiar. Dr. Lord, for example." Nurse Hopkins' breath caught, and for a moment Poirot thought she might bolt from the room. "Dr. Lord," she said, her voice rising. "He was there earlier, checking on Mrs. Wellman, but he left before the sandwiches were made. You can't think he had anything to do with it. He's a good man, devoted to Miss Elinor." "Devoted," we Poirot murmured. "But devotion, it can lead to desperate acts. Tell me, mademoiselle, what was Dr. Lord's manner that morning? Was he calm, or did he seem preoccupied?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. "He was quiet, I suppose. Worried about Mrs. Wellman. She was weaker than usual. He checked her medicine, adjusted her dose, and left. I didn't see him after that until he came back when it happened." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words. "And Mademoiselle Gerard? Did she ever speak of Dr. Lord? Of his kindness, his gifts?" Nurse Hopkins' lips pursed, and she looked away, toward the window where the mist was thinning. "Mary liked him," she said reluctantly. "He brought her books, encouraged her to study. She thought of him as a friend, nothing more. But he was always there, wasn't he? Always checking on her when he visited Mrs. Wellman." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Always there," he echoed. "And did this trouble you, mademoiselle? Or perhaps Mademoiselle Carlisle?" "I don't know about Miss Elinor," Nurse Hopkins said, her voice sharp. She never said anything to me. But Mary, she didn't mind Dr. Lord's attention. She was too kind-hearted, too trusting. That's what got her killed, if you ask me." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Trusting. Oui. And yet, Monsieur Bigland spoke of Mary's worry, a fear she would not name. Did she ever confide such a fear to you?" Nurse Hopkins shook her head, but her eyes flickered again, betraying her. "No, she never said anything like that. Mary was happy, excited about her future. If she was worried, she kept it to herself." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his growing certainty. Nurse Hopkins was hiding something, not the full truth, perhaps, but a piece of it, he decided. To press harder. "One last matter, mademoiselle. The mustard jar in the pantry, did you use it that day, or see it touched?" Her face froze, and for a moment Poirot thought she might faint. "Mustard," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know, I didn't touch it. Why would I? We used fish paste for the sandwiches, not mustard." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "But I find it curious, mademoiselle, that you react so strongly to a simple question. A jar, slightly askew, with a faint residue, perhaps it holds a secret non." Nurse Hopkins stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I've had enough of this," she snapped. "I don't know anything about mustard or apomorphine or any of your theories. I'm a nurse, not a murderer. If you want to help, Miss Elinor, stop badgering me and find the real killer." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "I intend to, mademoiselle, and I thank you for your time. The truth, it is near, and I will find it." As Nurse Hopkins stormed out, her footsteps echoing down the hall, Poirot sat back, his mind racing. Her reaction to the mustard jar was telling a crack in her carefully maintained facade. The jar, like the fish paste, might contain traces of apomorphine or another clue, and her agitation suggested she knew more than she admitted. Dr. Lord, too, remained a puzzle. His presence at Hunterbury, his access to medical substances, and his complex feelings for both Elinor and Mary made him a figure of interest. Poirot's thoughts turned to the tea party, reconstructing it once more. Elinor preparing the sandwiches alone. Nurse Hopkins bustling about with the tea. Mrs. Wellman, an unexpected participant, and Mary, the intended target, eating the poisoned sandwich. The apomorphine suggested a plan to mask the morphine's effects, perhaps to delay suspicion until it was too late. But Mrs. Wellman's death complicated the scheme. An accident, or a deliberate escalation. He made a note to summon Dr. Lord again, to test his reactions to the apomorphine discovery. The doctor's devotion to Elinor was genuine, but Poirot wondered if it masked a deeper motive, perhaps a desire to eliminate Mary, who had stirred feelings he could not reconcile. Nurse Hopkins, too, warranted further scrutiny. Her knowledge of the kitchen and the morphine cabinet made her a potential accomplice, if not the mastermind. As the mist outside lifted, revealing the village in sharp clarity, Poirot felt a surge of resolve. The crack in Nurse Hopkins' facade was a chink in the armor of deceit that surrounded the case. The truth was close, hidden in the interplay of love, jealousy, and medical cunning. The cypress trees of Hunterbury, dark and mournful, seemed to beckon, urging him to unravel their secrets. Poirot adjusted his tie, his eyes gleaming with determination. The next step, he knew, would bring him closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The air in Maidensford was thick with the promise of rain. The sky, a sullen gray that mirrored the tension coiling in Hercule Poirot's mind. He stood in the drawing-room of Hunterbury House, its French doors open to the terrace where the fatal tea party had unfolded. The room, with its heavy drapes and polished furniture, seemed to hold its breath, as if aware of the drama Poirot was about to orchestrate. The discovery of apomorphine in the fish paste, coupled with Nurse Hopkins' agitation at the mention of the mustard jar, had sharpened his suspicions. The truth, he felt, was tantalizingly close. But it required a final push, a carefully laid trap, to coax it into the light. Poirot had sent invitations to Dr. Peter Lord, Nurse Hopkins, and Elinor Carlisle, requesting their presence at Hunterbury. That evening, under the pretense of discussing new evidence, Elinor, granted temporary leave from custody due to her counsel's petition, would arrive under escort, her presence essential to unsettle the guilty party. Poirot's plan was simple yet daring: to confront the suspects with the apomorphine discovery and observe their reactions, trusting his keen perception to detect the flicker of guilt that would betray the killer. As the clock struck 6, the first to arrive was Dr. Lord, his face pale but resolute, his hazel eyes flickering with a mix of hope and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, removing his hat, "you've found something, haven't you? Something to clear Elinor." "Patience," Dr. Poirot replied, his voice smooth as silk. "The truth is like a delicate wine, it must be savored. Slowly, please, take a seat. We await the others." Nurse Hopkins entered next, her starched uniform a stark contrast to the unease in her eyes. She nodded curtly to Poirot, avoiding Dr. Lord's gaze, and sat stiffly on a velvet chair. Elinor Carlisle arrived last, escorted by a solemn police officer who remained by the door. Her face was drawn, her dark eyes hollow, yet she carried herself with the quiet dignity that had struck Poirot in the courtroom. She glanced at Dr. Lord, a faint warmth passing between them, before settling her gaze on Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady. "Mr. Seddon said, you have new evidence. Is it true? Can it help me?" Poirot raised a hand, his expression grave but reassuring. "Mademoiselle, I have promised to seek the truth, and that is what I shall do. Please, sit. We are all here to uncover what lies beneath the shadow of this tragedy." The group sat in a semicircle, the tension palpable as Poirot stood before them, his small figure commanding the room. He clasped his hands behind his back, his green eyes sweeping over each face. "Miss Amos," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "we are gathered to discuss the events of that fatal day at the tea party that claimed 2 lives. The evidence, it points to Mademoiselle Carlisle, her fingerprints on the teapot, her purchase of morphine, her presence in the kitchen. But I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in evidence that is too perfect. It is like a painting with no flaws in natural. We—" Dr. Lord leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "You mean someone framed her? Who, Monsieur Poirot? Who would do such a thing?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a subtle sign of his focus. "That is what we shall discover. Let us begin with a new fact, one the police did not find. The fish paste used in the sandwiches, it contained apomorphine, a substance not mentioned in the coroner's report. Apomorphine, Ms. Amos, is a medical drug used to induce vomiting or to mask other symptoms. It requires knowledge to procure and use. And so, I ask, who among us had such knowledge?" Nurse Hopkins' face paled, her fingers tightening on her apron. "Apomorphine," she said, her voice sharp. "I told you, I know nothing about it. I'm a nurse, not some poisoner. Mixing potions." Dr. Lord's eyes widened, and he turned to her, his voice low but urgent. "Nurse Hopkins, you were in the kitchen that morning. Did you see anyone near the fish paste?" "I saw nothing," she snapped, her cheeks flushing. "Miss Elinor opened the jar, spread it herself. I was busy with the tea, as I've said a dozen times." Elinor's voice, soft but clear, cut through the tension. "I did prepare the sandwiches, Monsieur Poirot. I used the fish paste because Mary liked it. But I swear, I added nothing else. I couldn't have." Poirot's gaze softened as he looked at her, but his tone remained firm. "I believe you, mademoiselle. The apomorphine suggests a hand other than yours, one with access to medical substances and a motive to harm Mademoiselle Gerardin, perhaps by accident. Madame Wellman, let us consider the kitchen that day. Nurse Hopkins, you were there, preparing tea. Dr. Lord, you visited earlier, checking on Madame Wellman. And Mademoiselle Carlisle, you were alone when the sandwiches were made, or were you? Elinor shook her head. I was alone, as far as I know. Mrs. Bishop was in and out, but I didn't see anyone else. Poirot's eyes moved to Nurse Hopkins, whose fingers now twisted a handkerchief with nervous energy. And you, Mademoiselle Hopkins, you insist you saw nothing unusual. Yet I find another detail. Curious, a mustard jar in the pantry, its lid askew, with a faint residue that was not mustard. I have sent it for analysis, but I suspect it, too, may hold apomorphine. What say you to that? Nurse Hopkins gasped, her handkerchief falling to her lap. Mustard, I never touched it. I don't know what you're talking about, Monsieur Poirot. You're trying to trap me, but I'm innocent. Dr. Lord's face darkened, and he turned to her, his voice trembling. Nurse Hopkins, if you know something, for God's sake, say it. Elinor's life is at stake. I know nothing, she cried, her voice breaking. I swear it. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Lord, whose hands were shaking, his eyes fixed on the floor. And you, doctor, you have the knowledge, the access to apomorphine. You were at Hunterbury that morning, and you cared for Mademoiselle Gerard, perhaps more than you have admitted. Did you, in your devotion to Mademoiselle Carlisle, wish to remove a rival? Dr. Lord's head snapped up, his face a mask of shock and anger. That's outrageous. I loved Mary as a friend, nothing more. My heart is with Elinor, always has been. I'd never harm anyone, least of all Mary or Mrs. Wellman. Elinor reached out, her hand touching his arm. Peter, please. Monsieur Poirot is only trying to help. Poirot's eyes gleamed, noting the doctor's trembling hands, the sweat beading on his brow. Love, doctor, can drive a man to desperate acts. You knew Mademoiselle Gerard's dreams, her plans to leave Maidensford. Did they threaten you? Perhaps, did you fear losing her, or losing Mademoiselle Carlisle to her cousin's infatuation? Dr. Lord stood, his chair scraping against the floor. I've had enough of this, he said, his voice hoarse. I asked you to save Elinor, not to accuse me of murder. I know nothing about apomorphine or mustard jars. I was at my surgery when it happened. Ask my patients. Poirot raised a placating hand, his expression calm but unyielding. Sit, doctor. I accuse no one yet. I merely test the waters, to see where the ripples lead. The apomorphine was placed in the fish paste by someone with skill, someone who wished to frame Mademoiselle Carlisle. We are close to the truth, Ms. Amos, but we must be honest with each other. Nurse Hopkins, her face flushed, rose abruptly. I won't stay for this nonsense, she said. I've done nothing wrong, and I won't be bullied by your tricks. As she moved toward the door, Poirot's voice stopped her. Mademoiselle Hopkins, one moment. If you leave, I will inform the police of my suspicions about the mustard jar. Stay, and perhaps we can resolve this without their intervention. She froze, her hand on the doorknob, then turned back, her eyes blazing. You've no proof, she said, but her voice trembled. Proof, mademoiselle, is what I seek, Poirot said, and I will find it. The room fell silent, the tension thick as the gathering storm outside. Poirot's trap had been set, and the cracks in their facades were widening. Dr. Lord's trembling hands, Nurse Hopkins' fear, Elinor's quiet resolve were pieces of the puzzle, and Poirot knew the next move would bring the truth into sharp relief. The cypress trees beyond the terrace, dark against the stormy sky, seemed to watch, waiting for the final act of this mournful drama. Chapter 11. The confession, the drawing room of Hunterbury House, was heavy with the scent of impending rain. The air charged with a tension that seemed to crackle like static. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of calm amidst the storm brewing among his assembled guests. Dr. Peter Lord, Nurse Hopkins, and Elinor Carlisle sat in uneasy silence, their faces etched with varying degrees of fear, defiance, and hope. The police officer by the door stood impassive, his presence a reminder of the stakes at hand. Poirot's trap, set with the revelation of apomorphine in the fish paste, had shaken the room, and now, as thunder rumbled in the distance, he prepared to press further, to force the truth from its hiding place. "Ms. Amos," Poirot began, his voice steady and resonant, "we stand at the edge of truth, but it is a precipice that requires courage to cross. The deaths of Madame Wellman and Mademoiselle Gerard were no accident, nor were they the work of Mademoiselle Carlisle. Despite the evidence so carefully arranged against her, the apomorphine in the fish paste, this is the key, a substance chosen by a mind with medical knowledge, a mind that sought to mask the morphine's effects and cast suspicion on an innocent woman." Dr. Lord's hands, resting on his knees, trembled visibly, and he leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "Monsieur Poirot, you keep saying medical knowledge. Are you accusing me? I told you, I was at my surgery when it happened. I had no part in this." Nurse Hopkins, her face pale but defiant, crossed her arms. "And I've said I know nothing about apomorphine, or any mustard jar. You're grasping at straws, Monsieur Poirot, trying to make something out of nothing." Dark eyes, steady despite her ordeal, met Poirot's. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I trust you to find the truth. I know I did not do this, but I cannot bear to see others suffer on my account. Please, tell us what you suspect." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his quickening resolve. He turned to Nurse Hopkins, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle Hopkins, your agitation at the mention of the mustard jar was most revealing. You deny touching it, yet your reaction suggests otherwise. Let us be clear, the jar, like the fish paste, may hold traces of apomorphine, a substance you, as a nurse, would know well. Did you tamper with it, perhaps, to aid another?" Her eyes widened, and she stood, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I did no such thing. I'm no poisoner, and I won't be accused by some foreigner with fancy ideas. If you've proof, show it, or leave me be." Poirot raised a placating hand, his tone calm but unyielding. "Proof, mademoiselle, is forthcoming. The mustard jar is with my chemist, and its secrets will soon be revealed. But let us turn to another matter, the morphine cabinet. You and Dr. Lord had keys, yet a lethal dose was taken. How, mademoiselle, did this happen under your watch?" Nurse Hopkins' lips trembled, and she sank back into her chair, her defiance crumbling. I don't know," she stammered. "The cabinet was locked, I swear it. I checked it that morning, and Dr. Lord did, too. Miss Elinor knew where it was, but I never saw her touch it." Poirot's eyes shifted to Dr. Lord, whose face was now ashen, his hands clenched into fists. "And you, doctor, you checked the cabinet, yet you insist you left before the tea party. Tell me, what was your purpose at Hunterbury that morning? Was it only to see Madame Wellman, or did you have another reason, perhaps, to speak with Mademoiselle Gerard?" Dr. Lord's breath caught, and he looked at Elinor, his eyes filled with anguish. "Elinor, I swear, I only wanted to help you. I cared for Mary, yes, but not the way they think. She was a friend, nothing more. I was there for Mrs. Wellman, to adjust her medicine. That's all." Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and relentless. "A friend, doctor. Yet Monsieur Bigland spoke of your hovering, your gifts, to Mademoiselle Gerard, and Nurse Hopkins. Noted your frequent visits, Your closeness to her. Was there more? Perhaps a love you could not admit, even to yourself. A love that drove you to act when you learned of her plans to leave Maidensford, to escape your reach. Dr. Lord's face contorted, and he stood, his voice breaking. No, I loved Elinor, always Elinor. Mary was. She was kind, bright, but she didn't want me, not like that. I tried to help her, to support her dreams, but when she rejected me, I couldn't bear it. I didn't mean for this to happen. The room froze, the air thick with the weight of his words. Elinor's eyes widened, her hand rising to her mouth. Nurse Hopkins gasped, her handkerchief falling to the floor. The police officer shifted, his hand on his notebook, ready to record. Poirot's gaze never wavered, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. What did you do, doctor? Speak, and let the truth free Mademoiselle Carlisle. Dr. Lord sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping, his face a mask of despair. I tampered with the fish paste, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I got apomorphine from the surgery, mixed it with the morphine I took. From the cabinet, I knew Elinor was making sandwiches for Mary, and I wanted Mary gone. She was going to leave, to take Mrs. Wellman's money and start a new life, and I couldn't stand it. I loved her, but she didn't love me. And Elinor, she was suffering because of Roddy's obsession with Mary, I thought. I thought if Mary was gone, Elinor would be free. Elinor's voice, soft but steady, broke the stunned silence. Peter, how could you? Mary was my friend and Aunt Laura. She was never meant to die, was she? Dr. Lord shook his head, tears streaming down his face. No, it was a mistake. Mrs. Wellman wasn't supposed to eat the sandwich. I didn't. No, she'd take one. I thought the apomorphine would make it look like food poisoning, that Elinor would be questioned but cleared, because no one would believe she'd poison her own aunt. I was wrong, so wrong. Nurse Hopkins, her face aghast, turned to him. You fool, she said, her voice trembling. You let me think it was an accident, and all this time, you were playing God. I saw you in the kitchen that morning, near the pantry, but I never thought you'd do this. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind piecing together the final threads. So, Mademoiselle Hopkins, you did see something. You chose to remain silent, perhaps to protect the doctor, or to avoid suspicion yourself. She nodded, her face crumpling. I didn't know what he'd done. Not then. I thought he was just checking supplies. I should have spoken up, but I was afraid of what it might mean. Poirot turned back to Dr. Lord, his expression grave. You took the morphine, doctor, and the apomorphine, and you placed them in the fish paste, knowing Mademoiselle Carlisle would be blamed. You used her pain, her broken engagement, to craft a motive that would deceive the police. But you did not count on Madame Wellman's whim, nor on Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Dr. Lord buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. I'm sorry, Elinor. I thought I was saving you. I never meant for it to go this far. Elinor's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. You thought you were saving me. By killing Mary. Oh, Peter, how could you think that would save anyone? The police officer stepped forward, his notebook open. Dr. Lord, I'll need you to come with me, he said, his tone firm but not unkind. Monsieur Poirot, will you provide a statement? Mais oui, Poirot said, bowing slightly. The truth is now clear, and Mademoiselle Carlisle is free of this shadow. As Dr. Lord was led away, his head bowed, Nurse Hopkins followed, her face a mask of shame. Elinor remained seated, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot approached her, his voice gentle. Mademoiselle, the ordeal is over. You are innocent, and the world will know it. She looked up, her eyes glistening. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, but I I can't help feeling responsible. If I hadn't been so hurt by Roddy, if I'd seen Peter's pain. Poirot shook his head. Non, mademoiselle. The heart of another is not your burden. You are free now, to live without this shadow. As the storm broke outside, rain lashing the windows, Poirot felt the weight of the case lift. The confession had been won. The trap sprung with precision. The cypress trees, visible through the rain-streaked glass, stood as silent witnesses to the truth unveiled. But Poirot's work was not yet done. There were details to confirm, statements to give. The truth, though revealed, left a bitter taste. And he knew the echoes of this tragedy would linger in Maidensford long after he departed. Chapter 12. Justice and clarity. The rain had ceased, leaving Maidensford bathed in a tentative morning. Light that glistened on the wet cobblestones and sparkled in the dew-laden roses. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the village green, his polished shoes slightly damp from the grass, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Hunterbury House, the cypress trees. Their dark forms, softened by the mist, stood as mournful sentinels, their shadows no longer oppressive but poignant, as if acknowledging the truth now laid bare. Dr. Peter Lord's confession. The previous evening had unraveled the tangled threads of the case, freeing Elinor Carlisle from the spectre of conviction and exposing the tragic interplay of love and desperation that had led to the deaths of Mary Gerard and Mrs. Wellman. Poirot's mind, ever meticulous, replayed the events of the confrontation. Dr. Lord's anguished admission, Nurse Hopkins' reluctant corroboration, and Elinor's quiet resilience in the face of betrayal. The apomorphine in the fish paste, a cunning addition to mask the morphine's effects, had been the doctor's attempt to eliminate Mary, whom he loved but could not possess, while framing Elinor in a way he believed would be disproved. Mrs. Wellman's death, an unintended consequence, had complicated his plan, turning a calculated murder into a double tragedy. Poirot felt no triumph in the resolution, only the somber satisfaction of a puzzle solved, a balance restored. He returned to the Red Lion Inn, where a telegram awaited him from his London chemist. The mustard jar, as he had suspected, contained traces of apomorphine, confirming that Dr. Lord had tampered with multiple condiments to ensure his poison reached its target. The report was a final piece of evidence, unnecessary now, but a testament to Poirot's thoroughness. He tucked it into his valise, alongside his notes, and prepared to meet Elinor Carlisle one last time before departing Maidensford. Elinor awaited him in the inn's parlor, her dark eyes clearer than they had been in days, though shadowed by a lingering sorrow. She wore a simple grey dress, her hands folded in her lap, her composure a stark contrast to the trembling figure in the courtroom. The police escort was gone, her innocence now formally acknowledged by the authorities, who had arrested Dr. Lord and were preparing charges based on his confession. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising as he entered, "I owe you my life. Without your persistence, I would be facing a noose. But I cannot help but feel the weight of this tragedy. Peter, Mary, Aunt Laura, how did it come to this?" Poirot bowed slightly, his expression grave but kind. "Mademoiselle, the human heart is a labyrinth, and love, it can lead to paths, both noble and dark. Dr. Lord's actions were born of a twisted devotion, a desire to protect you that became a betrayal. You are not to blame for his choices, nor for the pain that drove them." Elinor's lips trembled, but she nodded. "I know, yet it hurts to think of Mary, so full of life, and Aunt Laura, who loved her in her own way, and Peter, I thought. He was my friend. How could I not see his feelings for Mary, or the lengths he would go to?" Poirot seated himself across from her, his hands clasped. "The heart, mademoiselle, is not always transparent, even to those closest to it. Dr. Lord hid his pain, as you hid yours over Monsieur Wellman's betrayal. But you showed strength, not vengeance. That is why I knew you could not be the killer." She looked at him, her eyes searching. "You believed in me from the start, didn't you? Even when the evidence was so damning." Oui, Poirot said, his voice soft. The tome on the evidence. It was too perfect. Mademoiselle, a true criminal does not leave such obvious clues. The fingerprints, the morphine purchase, the teapot was a frame, designed to point to you. Hercule Poirot, he does not trust perfection in crime. Elinor managed a small smile, the first Poirot had seen. You see things others miss, Monsieur Poirot. I don't know how to thank you. There is no need, Poirot said, rising. Live well, mademoiselle. That is thanks enough. And perhaps, in time, leave this place of sorrow. Hunterbury holds too many ghosts. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I will. I can't stay here, not after this. I'll sell the estate, start anew somewhere far away. Perhaps London, or even abroad. I want to forget the pain, if I can. Poirot bowed again, his heart heavy with sympathy. You are young, mademoiselle, and the heart heals, though it takes time. I wish you peace. As he left the parlor, the weight of the case settled over him like a cloak. The walk back to his lodgings was quiet, the village stirring to life under a clearing sky. At the inn, he packed his valise, his movements precise and deliberate. The coroner's report, the chemist's findings, and his own notes would be handed over to Mr. Seddon, who would ensure Dr. Lord's prosecution proceeded smoothly. Nurse Hopkins, though complicit in her silence, faced no charges. Her role too minor to warrant legal action, but Poirot knew her conscience would be her punishment. Standing at the window, gazing out at the cypress trees in the distance, Poirot reflected on the frailty of human nature. Dr. Lord's love for Mary, unrequited and twisted, had led to a desperate act. His love for Elinor had blinded him to the consequences. Mary's dreams, Mrs. Wellman's affection, Roddy's infatuation, all had woven a tapestry of tragedy, with threads of jealousy, devotion, and deceit. Poirot felt no joy in his victory, only a quiet resolve to continue his pursuit of truth, wherever it led. As he boarded the train to London, the village receding behind him, Poirot's thoughts turned to the future. Elinor would rebuild, he hoped, free from the shadows of Hunterbury. The cypress trees, symbols of mourning, would stand as a reminder of the cost of hidden passions. The case of the Sad Cypress was closed, but its echoes lingered in Poirot's meticulous mind, a testament to the delicate balance of justice and clarity.